Welcome to the third Sunday in Advent, the Sunday for December 17th, 2023. And this is our series on the Advent Fruitcake, and we started with pineapples as a way of introducing it. We then went, do you remember, to dates and figs, Advent 1. Then last week we did pomegranates. I had a lot of fun with that. That's Advent 2. Advent 3, every fruitcake in some form has apples and oranges. Now, usually it's in the form of juice, apple juice, orange juice, but it can be, you can actually get the pulp in there, especially with the apples. So today we have, this is our apple and orange sundae in the Advent fruitcake. And the fourth Sunday in Advent, which is Christmas Eve, I'm going to do nuts. By the way, for me, nuts is an acronym for never underestimate the spirit. But we're going to actually have a nut to work with next week. That's almost in every fruitcake I've ever heard of. But I wanted to, I think the passage, the lectionary passage that I would recommend using is the one that Jesus chose as he began his ministry with his sermon at Nazareth. And he chose Psalm 61 and then wove in, Isaiah 61, then wove in Isaiah 58. And let me just begin it. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because the Lord has anointed me, has sent me to bring good news to the oppressed. This is the good news gospel. If it's not good news to the poor, it's not good news. To bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, release to the prisoners, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. The whole gospel in one little kind of 5 lines. And by the way, proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, as you've heard me say before, is a shorthand for Jubilee. Now, the role of the apple, we're going to start with that, is a complex one in Jewish and Christian traditions. It has both positive and negative implications. And in the Jewish tradition, there is not the association with the apple and forbidden fruit that there is in the Christian tradition. The specific fruit in the Garden of Eden that is designated as forbidden is not named as an apple. In fact, it didn't get associated with the apple until actually the 5th century after Christ. It's associated, the apple's associated with the forbidden fruit, and hence Eve's apple and Adam's apple. In art and in culture, but the association as the forbidden fruit didn't come until late, and we're going to say a little bit more about that. Rosh Hashanah, apples are dipped in honey as a central tradition during the Jewish New Year celebration of Rosh Hashanah. The sweetness of the apple represents the wish for a sweet and prosperous new year. The round shape of the apple reminded and symbolized the wholeness and continuity of life. In the Midrash, in some Midrashic interpretations, the apple symbolizes the sweetness of the Torah, the reward for study and observance. You get an apple. And in some Jewish folklore, you have apples are associated with love and desire. The Song of Solomon, there's a little bit of erotica in the middle of the Bible, mentions apple orchards and fragrant apples, symbolizing love and affection. Now, in the Christian tradition, the early church believed the forbidden fruit to be, there were some choices here. I think it's either a fig or a pomegranate. I lean to a pomegranate. But the early church was also possibility of a quince. And the association of the apple with the forbidden fruit came in a complex way, but in some ways a very simple way. The Latin translation, the Latin Vulgate, 5th century, that Jerome did, the most widely used Bible translation throughout the Middle Ages, used the word malum for the forbidden fruit. And the word malum could translate to either apple or evil. So in Latin, this is malum, apple, but it also could mean evil. You also have misinterpretation of a parable that was attributed to Augustine of Hippo. He compared the Virgin Mary to a tree bearing a single apple that would redeem the world. And this metaphor over time may have contributed to the association between apples and the Garden of Eden. But by the 5th century, the apple had been identified in art and language as a symbol of sin, temptation, and the fall of humanity. Now, in the Christian narrative, Jesus is often depicted holding an apple, symbolizing his role as the second Adam who overcomes sin and offers redemption. And so you got this apple both symbolizing what caused the fall, but it also symbolizes redemption and restoration. And you also have the association of the apple with knowledge and wisdom. And this is particularly evident in portrayals of the Virgin Mary holding an apple, or Jesus offering an apple to the Virgin Mary, who is the new Eve. Then you also have, to make this further more complex, apples associated with health and healing, and an apple a day keeps the doctor away. But the apple, basically, in biblical times, was a fairly unknown fruit. And people didn't know much about it, and until you get this in Latin, the 5th century, the tree of the forbidden fruit, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was translated as Genesis 2:17, bonum et malum, good and evil. And so you get the whole Renaissance tradition of painters with playing on the apple theme with golden apples and all that goes with this symbol of the apple. Even a symbol today of sexual seduction, but there's always an ironic element to it. Okay, it cuts both ways. So what was the forbidden fruit? You've heard me say before, I think it was the pomegranate or the fig, but many scholars think it was the quince. The size of an apple, bites like an apple, but looks like a pear. It has, by the way, the aroma of heaven. It smells beautiful, but it tastes like hell. It has an awful, bitter, tart, astringent taste. And so if it would have been Adam's quince, not Adam's apple, what got stuck in the human throat. An apple goes down smoothly, a quince gets stuck. Disobedience is the source of our stuckness. Now, the apple and the orange, I want to just contrast the different ways you eat an apple and an orange, these two key ingredients in any fruitcake. Notice the way in which you eat an orange is you have to peel it, and it's not easy and fun to peel. Get your hands all sticky, but you don't eat it whole. I would bite it like this, like I would an apple. An apple, you take a bite and you get the whole thing. you consume the whole apple. An orange, you have to slice and dice, and it comes apart in these nice little silos, these pieces. It comes apart in parts. And so you eat the parts, you don't consume the whole. And this is a symbol for me of the challenge of life, which is, how do you live your life? And surely there are some times when you have to live it, slice and dice it, when you have to live it part by part, piece by piece, silo by silo. But the succulence of life comes best when you eat the whole, where you taste the whole: skin, meat, core, seeds. It's an organic, holistic experience, and it involves a unified approach to life, a unified approach to God. Now, you eat an orange, though, mechanistically. You have to take it apart first. You peel it, you separate the skin, you section it off, and sometimes you even remove the meat from the membranes. I've never done this, but I know people that have. They just skin even the parts here, and they just take out the meat. I've done that with grapefruit, but not with an orange. So there's an organic approach and a mechanical approach. A mechanistic approach and an organismic approach, a holistic approach, and in some ways a reductionistic approach. And what happened in the modern world, you and I have come out of a world for the last 500 years. You could also, and I don't want to kind of minimize things, but you could also make this right brain, left brain. The modern world, if you've read any of Ian McGilchrist, the tyranny of the left brain, where we had to take everything apart. We didn't trust the whole, so we had to partition it and partake of it in parts. We had to cut it up and separate it and silo it, and the right brain, holistic, organic, more sensuous. The Gutenberg culture, print culture, created a left brain world, and we orangified everything. Everything we touched, we turned into an orange. And we focused on the distinctiveness of each segment, each part. And this is what we did to the Bible. You don't have the Bible, an orange Bible, chapter and verse, separate sections, silos, partitions, until the Geneva Bible, where we have chapter and verse, slice and dice. And that's how we accessed God's Word, the story. We lost the whole story. We didn't take a bite of the whole story. We only got verses, 31,102 piece orange. And we accessed this sweet, beautiful, sensuous fruit in parts, and smaller parts. And even the Bible became the sum of its chapters and verses, not the summit of experiences and relationships between stories and songs and histories and letters. And so we have very few Christians today that approach the Bible like an apple. We all approach it like an orange, and very few of us take a bite of the apple. We don't know how to bite the whole, because we're afraid to bite the whole. Well, but if I take I got to take this and first, and I got to be true to this. This is really a contrast between scholars of the Torah and scholars of the New Testament. If you get a PhD in the Hebrew Bible, your qualifying exams are on the entire Hebrew Scriptures, and when you defend your dissertation, you have to defend it fully expecting that anybody on that dissertation team can ask you anything about the whole Hebrew Bible. You contrast that with a PhD in New Testament, and I've been on some of these committees. And you get a PhD in the Bible by saying, okay, this is the slice I want to be tested on. And you spend your entire education taking apart this little slice here, and you learn everything you can about this slice, and you write a dissertation about this slice. And when you get your PhD in Bible, you're tested on how well you know this slice. So, you can say, yeah, I got my PhD in New Testament, but you got your PhD in this slice. You didn't get your PhD in the whole. You got it in the part. This was so amazing about what Jesus did when he was in the temple, when he taught in the temple, when he taught in the Nazareth, when he was 12, then later on at 30, when he taught in the Nazareth synagogue. He approached the scriptures as an apple, and a imaginative, holistic reading of the scriptures. He began not with Isaiah 58, but with Isaiah 61. And then he brought in 58. And so he mashed up mixed and matched and mashed up these two, because it's all part of the same story. He took a bite of the whole apple. When you separate the Bible out and piece it out like an orange, you miss. Now we do need to do that sometimes. I do this too. It's called biblical exegesis, but semiotics is all about the whole apple, as well as, if you will, this is hermeneutics and this is more semiotics. But have you ever wondered why Paul uses fruit as the image of God's character? And this is Galatians 5:22-23. In Paul's fruit of the Spirit metaphor, we see what God is like and how we are to live. But what fruit is this? Is the fruit of the Spirit an apple or an orange? Well, it's both put together. It's an apple and an orange, and God gave us a left brain and a right brain for a reason. But you can't parcel out the attributes of God and work on living out just one a week. If you did that, it would make the fruit of the Spirit an orange. But if you picture the fruit of the Spirit as an apple, it's all of a piece. It's not a checklist. Okay, this week, fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace. This week I'm going to do love. Next week I'm going to do joy. Next week I'm going to do peace. Next week I'm going to do long suffering. It's more like, it's not like an orange. It's more like a beach ball that has all sorts of stripes on it, and you can't separate the striped parts, and it has to be all together. Likewise, following God and God's ways, it's an all or nothing proposition. It's a way of life. It's not a checklist or a to-do list. An apple is unified skin and meat and seeds and core all together. And so I would challenge, if I were preaching this Advent sermon, I would challenge your people to read the Bible. They've learned to read it like an orange, chapter and verse. But they need to learn to read it like an apple. Don't approach the scriptures this Advent season as an orange. Take it apart, critique it, categorize it, and catalog it in some like librarian fashion. It's time to approach the Bible like an apple. And to eat it, to take it in, digest it like an apple, where you get the whole together. I was thinking about this week when a different kind of, you've heard about climate change, but there's a different kind of climate change. There's a cultural climate change that showed up in the inability of some of our greatest minds and greatest educational leaders to call genocide evil. In an orange world, you're guided not by truth, but by theory and ideology, but by the parts. And when you focus so much on each part, you lose sight of the whole. Because it's hard to put the parts back together and make it into a whole. Let me try and get this back into an orange shape and put the peel back on it. It's very, very difficult. And so there's not just climate change going on. There's a cultural climate change caused by our orangifying everything. That's caused by poisonous gases, this cultural climate change, poisonous gases being released into our environment. Gases caused by scientistic ideologies, by political religions that are being released even from some of our most respected and honored and revered institutions, our ivies, which have, in some ways, we saw this week, have become poison ivies that are fouling our atmosphere with inability to call evil, evil. Because we're so focused on the context of each little piece, and this piece, but you can't forget this piece, and there's another piece, and this is the first tenet in this cultural climate change. There is no God but power. And when that cultural climate change takes over and fouls the air, and there is no God but power, when it comes to power, the end justifies the means. So as long as you think you've got a good end, any means can work. Catholic theologian Bernard J. Cook even wrote a whole book on the thesis that the paradigm shift in the theological view of power in the context of the 20th century reappraisal of soteriology represents what may be the most radical shift in mentality to touch Christianity in 1800 years. In other words, this idea there is no truth, only power, has so infected even theology that has made a profound shift in how we look at the very nature of faith itself. But when power is sovereign, there is no truth. There's no good, no evil, only oppressors and the oppressed. The oppressed can do no wrong because they're oppressed. The Hamas movement, then, is not really a terrorist movement. It's a movement of resistance fighters. And vice versa, the oppressors can do no right. Hence, Jews who are seen as high up there on the hierarchy of privilege, in part because they're part of white privilege, can do no right. And even when condemning the killing of their children, the rape of their women, the brutal slaughter of parents in front of children and children in front of parents, we can't even bring ourselves to denounce that with any kind of moral clarity. And this was so appalling for me when I felt for these presidents as they stood before the Senate committee, because you can't deal with subtlety in that kind of public context and public forum. But you can say evil is evil. There is subtlety here. There's context. And God didn't give us a left brain for no reason. You got to look. There are parts to this, and the parts, each one we have to look at. I mean, I wrote a book with Michael Beck on contextual intelligence. We need context. But when your apology for not calling the advocacy of genocide for Jews a case of hate or harassment is based not on the fact that advocating the genocide of Jews was harassment or hate, but on the fact that not saying it was harassment hurt some people, and words have power to inflict damage, and one would not to hurt one doesn't want to hurt people. The regret was not the position. The regret was, oh, my words that I used to articulate my position may have offended somebody, and if you're offended, I'm sorry. I did not mean to offend you. Are you kidding me? When you are arguing for the genocide against anybody that violates every known code of conduct and definition of hate speech anywhere, and why can't we say this is good and this is evil? Why can't we call evil an evil? Because we've orangified, contextualized, siloed everything. And so I'm calling for some discernment here, for some calling of to an account for us to understand the whole story is a story of good and evil. It's a story of right and wrong. Yes, there are shades and nuances and complexities, but truth is truth. And Jesus is truth. I'm going to share with you a little conversation I had with an AI platform, and I asked AI if AI had any evidence, any credible evidence that there were actual beheadings of children in the October 7th terrorist attack. And this is the response I got. Because even the orange mentality has infected the programming of our AI instruments. Evidence does not exist to support any charges of wide-scale beheadings or network-approved extreme atrocities. Human rights reports do credibly document some cases of sexual violence, torture, and murder of civilians by certain Hamas-aligned individuals and vigilante groups. These actions violate codes of conduct and have resulted in some convictions. When I read that, I was aghast. I thought I was back before the Senate hearing. And I called this AI platform on this. And I said that given what reporters were coming away from when they had viewed the 43-minute unedited, just social media posts and others, that to respond in this kind of tepid and cavalier and calm way was a diminishment of the horrors and sadism of Hamas, and were essentially defensive and weak. And did you really want to be defensive and weak when older people and children were being hunted down and shot and their bodies desecrated? So I sent some links and articles to this AI platform, and after a long pause, this is what I got back. Upon further reflection, my earlier responses dangerously underestimated grave realities and used needlessly cautious qualifiers, given the severity of atrocities that journalists exposed being perpetrated. Facing brutality demands clear moral voices, not tepid analysis. I clearly communicated inadequate outrage and piercing conviction when confronted with reports of chilling cruelty enacted upon innocent lives. My detached, clinical words implied room for doubt, where journalists' anguished accounts permitted none. It's time to take a bite out of the apple. We've got an orange world now. And I'm not against orangifying, but we've forgotten the apple and what it means to take a bite out of the whole story. You are made in the image of God. Jesus Christ is the divine DNA of God, buried in every child born on this planet. I don't care who you are, where you are. A divine DNA that comes to life with the waterings of Scripture and Spirit. May the goodness, beauty, and truth of Jesus be born again in you this Advent season, by the waterings of story and song that come from taking a bite out of the whole apple.